Welcome, everybody, to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber. Months after their son pleaded guilty to committing a school shooting, his parents are next in line for charges. Ethan Crumbley killed 4 people and injured 7 others in 2021. On Tuesday, a Michigan appeals court heard arguments from both defense attorneys and the lead prosecutor in the case against his mother and father. They're trying to decide whether Jennifer and James Crumbley should be brought to trial on involuntary manslaughter charges. The Michigan Supreme Court granted their request to have the case heard by an appellate court after the couple requested that the charges be thrown out. A decision hasn't been made on the case yet, but if the appellate court rules in favor of the prosecution, Jennifer and James Crumbley will be the first parents in America to stand trial in connection to a school shooting. During the hearing, appellate judges did not go easy on the attorneys in this case. Let's take a listen.
James Crumbley had no knowledge of what EC was planning.
He was called over to the school that day, wasn't he?
He was.
He had knowledge then.
He had knowledge that there was a drawing, but had no knowledge of what EC was planning to do that day or at any other point.
Certainly a warning signal, wouldn't you say?
It could be a warning sign that EC may have been troubled or may have been having certain thoughts, but not a warning sign that he was going to kill 4 other people.
Warning.
Go ahead.
Sorry, warning sign that maybe he had access to a gun?
James Crumbley did not know that EC had access to that firearm.
He bought him the gun.
Well, and the first thing he did when he heard about the school shooting was go back home to see if the gun was there. So certainly was on the top of his head.
The school district or the personnel there equally as culpable as the parents, as Ms. Smith said?
I would push back on that and say no. First, I would disagree that they had the same level of knowledge. These parents knew more, such as he was gifted that gun days earlier, that it was considered his.
No,
that he was
having a gun, there's nothing illegal for parents buying a gun for their children.
There's not, but it is.
And the school district even said it's a fine hobby.
It is.
Just don't bring it to school.
It is.
You also charged EC as an adult. Should that factor in? You consider him as an adult, the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office, the state considers him an adult. Should that factor in our decision here?
No,
he's not a child. You're calling him an adult.
All right, I'm joined right now by my co-host and legal analyst, defense attorney Brian Buckmeyer and former trial attorney Terry Austin. Terry, the judges asked both sides some pretty difficult questions. Who do you think had the better argument?
Well, I think the prosecution made a great case, but the defense came back strong, no doubt about it. And those questions were very difficult. The judge wanted to know, all of the judges actually were asking about whether or not it was foreseeable, was there a duty owed to the other students, was the action or inaction of the parents the proximate cause of the death of the students. And so they really wanted to get to the roots and to the bottom line to determine whether or not these parents, because this is the issue, can these be parents held criminally liable for the criminal actions of their son? And as it turns out, the facts in this case are egregious, and that's what the prosecution was trying to argue. They were saying that there was so much information that they should have known that their child was going through these depressions and had hallucinations. There were text messages to the mother about the hallucinations. He lost his dog, his best friend moved away. All of those factors, I think, are what makes the prosecution's case pretty strong.
Brian, why is the case being heard by appellate courts? Why is it on appeal? And by the way, the decision here, do you think it could have bigger repercussions down the line?
Yeah, so Jesse, typically we see appeals after someone's been convicted, but here the fundamental question of whether or not the actions of the parents fall in line with the charge that they're facing, that being involuntary manslaughter, that's something the appellate court's going to jump into before a trial court gets a first bite at the apple, so to speak. And yes, it has massive repercussions. No other state, whether it be a trial court or an appellate court like we have here, has looked at it. And the way the country is built, it has 12 circuit courts. This is the 6th circuit court. That means that Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, and Tennessee, those states are going to be looking to see what Michigan does, and the other states and the rest of the country are probably doing the same as well to say, where will this line be drawn?
Right, and I think you have to look specifically at the facts of this case. There are certain elements of it that might just make it stand out from anything else when you have people say that, oh, it's just going to be a slippery slope, parents will be charged for everything. Maybe not so clear. Over the past 5 months, several people from the United States took trips to Mexico and never came home. The latest incident was just last week when 4 Americans drove from South Carolina to Mexico looking to get cosmetic surgery. This was according to Mexican officials. And during that trip, they found themselves in the midst of a deadly shootout and were eventually kidnapped and thrown in the back of a pickup truck by heavily armed men. All 4 Americans were located this week, but sadly 2 of them didn't make it out alive. The deceased victims have been identified as Shahid Woodard and Zindell Brown. The surviving victims, Latavia McGee and Eric Williams, have returned to the United States and are getting treatment at a hospital. While the investigation is still ongoing, authorities say the victims were targeted by a Mexican cartel who likely mistook them for drug smugglers. We've also seen the following ongoing investigation into the death of Shanquilla Robinson. This is the woman beaten to death in October while on vacation in Cabo San Lucas. The 25-year-old was found dead in a hotel room while at a luxury resort with her friends. The group claimed that Robinson died of alcohol poisoning, but autopsy reports determined that Robinson, in fact, had trauma to her head and spine. Mexican authorities issued an arrest warrant in November for femicide. This is a form of gender-based violence. According to a Mexican prosecutor, quote, "A friend of Robinson's is the direct aggressor. Robinson's family believes that that person is most likely back in the United States. They're asking the U.S. Justice Department to get involved and prosecute her killer." And in a third incident, California lawyer Elliot Blair was found dead at a Mexican resort in January, and there have been conflicting reports about what exactly happened. You see, Blair was in Mexico with his wife to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. His wife said that hours before his death, they were stopped by Mexican police for allegedly running a stop sign. The officers demanded cash, and Blair sternly made it clear that the couple were defense attorneys, even flashing his badge. The officers reportedly asked what hotel they were staying in, took $160 of cash from them, and then ultimately left. Authorities initially blamed Blair's death on an accidental fall since he was found directly below his second-floor hotel room, but an autopsy report by a Mexican coroner indicated that his death was an aggravated homicide. This week, I actually had a chance to interview 2 DEA agents that were involved in the apprehension of one of the most notorious drug cartel operators, Pablo Escobar.
They control what's going on down there. I'm sure that the Mexican police and Mexican military will respond, but I'm not sure as urgently as maybe we would here in the United States. I mean, we've seen that most times they are outgunned. They're overpowered by the weaponry that the bad guys have. The fact that the United States is working with Mexico, I'd love to hear that. Little hesitant to believe that 100% because we know that President Lopez Obrador is somewhat reluctant to take on the criminal groups there, especially the drug cartels.
Terry, it seems that these cases would have a better chance of being resolved if they were handled in the United States. Would I be right about that?
I absolutely believe you are right about that. Look, you have to look at this from the perspective of what happens before the case goes to trial and what happens once they have the individual in jail. The United States is not perfect. The criminal justice system really has a bad reputation for having so many people incarcerated, and predominantly people of color in the jails in the United States. But at least you have due process, and at least some of those cases are investigated. About 50% of the cases, of the murder cases, are actually resolved. In Mexico, you don't have that. Only about 5% are resolved, and there is torture and there are killing of defendants. So it's very different.
And Brian, what are some of the hurdles to prosecute these cases?
Well, Jesse, in these cases, they're a little bit different from one to the other. I mean, in the Shanquilla case, if you look at that, the perpetrator is accused to be an American citizen. So America kind of has the ball on their court, so to speak, where they can return the person back to Mexico and then let the justice system continue to there. But the question is this system one that's going to find justice? Terry's already pointed out some of the shortcomings of the Mexican justice system. But in the other two, where it's alleged drug cartel, and it seems like there's some shady doings on the police department there in the attorney's case, that's a little bit more difficult because there the defendant in the case would be a Mexican citizen. So the U.S. can pressure, but they can't really step in and do much from a legal standpoint in terms of making sure justice is found in all 3 of these cases.
Just a really sad series of events for people that went down there.